Ever since the release of Overwatch, there have been a few constants that keep the game flowing. Lucky Hanzo shots, insane play of the games, and rules. Depending on the day, you might be matched with a team where your guys' team chemistry is on another level. Or you might be matched with a Moira who doesn't know that the character has the capability to help heal her team. Either way, it's obvious that Blizzard has tried to make rules balanced. And to be fair, they have come a long way. But there are still some glaring issues that need to be fixed. For instance, why the tank role seems to be the least enjoyable out of the three. Or the issue that your support characters are getting more elimination than your DPS characters. This video will venture into all this and more, but first we need to go back a few years to see how the roles have changed. Upon release, the original 4 roles were offense, defense, support, and tank, where the characters in the offense roles were more diving, get to the backline characters like Genji and Tracer. Then you had the defense role that included characters like Widowmaker and Junkrat that were better off sitting in your own backline protecting the support characters or certain areas on the map. The support role was all about getting your team that extra edge in teamfights, whether it was healing from your Mercy or movement speed from your Lucio. They were one of the most crucial pieces of the puzzle. And finally, we have the tank role, which was basically characters that were meant to soak up damage and provide that first line of defense. Eventually, the roles changed to what we have today, where Blizzard decided to combine the defense and offense role into one, giving us the DPS role. Let's take a look at one of the more controversial roles first. Yes, I'm talking about the support role. But before we do that, let's make one thing clear. Supports are not healers. If you have to label them as something, then call them enablers or opportunity givers. As in, they provide opportunities for the other heroes to get eliminations in the game. Whether that's from speed buffs, anti-grenades, poke damage, or healing, they are there to enable their teammates. The idea that they were healers might have been the case in Overwatch 1, but this has to be the furthest from the truth when it comes to Overwatch 2, as they provide so much more value to the teams than just healing. Now that that's out of the way, let's dive into their biggest issue, which is how some of the heroes in the support role are enabling themselves more than their team. The biggest culprit behind this is the most recent support added, Illari. When we take a look at her kit, most of it is used to help herself out rather than her team. In all honesty, she resembles Soldier 76 more than the other support characters. All of the support characters have one thing in common, and that is their ultimates can be utilized by their teammates and not just for themselves. This is even true for the now turned DPS character, Symmetra, where her wall can be used more for her team rather than herself. However, when it comes to Illari, this is not the case. Yes, it does slow people who get hit by it, but ultimately it's used to secure eliminations similar to Soldier 76 or Genji. So, if it wasn't clear, I'm on team Illari needs to become a DPS, or at the very least, get a rework. DPS is arguably one of the more popular roles in the game for a couple of reasons. One, this is where most of the roster resides, so there are more options to choose from. And 2, most people who come from a shooting game like Call of Duty or CSGO are familiar with the idea of getting eliminations for the team rather than protecting or supporting them. This actually leads us to one of the only real issues with the role, that being the lack of characters in DPS that don't provide value to the team other than doing damage and getting elims. Characters like Genji and Bastion won't be of use to the team if they aren't getting eliminations, whereas characters like Mei can still be useful even if they aren't the main damage dealer, like how she can be utilized in an off-tank role, taking some of that responsibility of taking damage and gaining space from the tank. Now, I don't believe it's bad that a character should just have one job, like getting damage for the team or kills. But the direction of Overwatch 2 seems like characters will need to be able to fulfill multiple sub-roles outside of their main role. A pretty big example of this is heroes from the support role. Their main job is to provide support for the team, so things like healing and giving out buffs. But their secondary role is to dish out damage on the other team to create opportunities for the DPS and tanks to get picks. Now, before you go off the rails saying, support shouldn't do damage, they should heal, think about this. If we have two teams where both teams' DPS and tank have similar damage and eliminations, often more times than not, the team with the support who has healing and decent damage is the team that will win. This is pretty evident even in the pro scene. That's why some of the most used support characters were ones who could not only heal, but also deal damage like Baptiste and Illari. Let's talk about the tank role. Probably the least played out of the three, and perhaps has the most obvious problem. If you haven't guessed already, the tank's biggest problem is that it could be the least fun out of the three roles. Not saying there aren't fun heroes to play in the tank role, but it's the fact that everything relies solely on you as the tank. So providing protection for the team, gaining space, being the damage sponge, all these responsibilities heavily depend on you being successful. If we look at an Overwatch 2 team as if they were a city, both the DPS and support role have a fail-safe system implemented. Meaning, if one of the supports or DPS isn't doing that well, there's a second player that can try to pull the weight of the other. When it comes to the tank, they aren't so lucky. If they're doing badly in a game, they don't have someone who can cover their back for them, or someone they can lean on to give them support. Which is why there should be more characters in both support and DPS that can play the off-tank role. Two characters that somewhat fit this role are Brigitte and Mei. Both have their own main goals, like getting eliminations and healing the team, but they can also play close to the tank and provide them with the support that they need. Thus, creating this dynamic that the tank doesn't have to do everything themselves. So it's not that roles specifically are the only thing that needs some changes, but in general, Blizzard could make some tweaks here and there to make the overall role experience better. For instance, if they added some sort of tip on the side that gave players knowledge on which characters played well with one another. It could be good for the casual player base so they can pick characters that have good team chemistry rather than just picking whoever and they don't fit well into the team composition. They could also add a tip that told which characters are good counters to one another. Because at the end of the day, Overwatch is not like other games where you're stuck playing one character the whole game. You get the option to make picks and counter picks during the game so that your team can make changes and get that win. AKA, if you're playing Doom and you're 1-9, something might not be working and it might be time to switch to a different character. All joking aside, Overwatch 2 has been moving in a very positive direction in the recent months. There are just some adjustments that can be made by the developers that can really make the whole role gameplay more enjoyable as a player.